Akane was a hopeless romantic who thought Cupid would never visit her again after her boyfriend cheated and dumped her for a girl he met in an online game. Now depressed and heartbroken, she decided to vent in the game but ended up rizzing up a god-tier gamer who has zero emotions but would do anything for her.
I like you.
No, that's too much! It hurts!
It all began one faithful day in a cafe when Akane's two-timing boyfriend broke up with her because he found a girl whose head game was better than the Gok 3000. Instead of calling him out for being a lying scumbag, Akane pretended to be okay and went home to tell her best friend Momo about her breakup. Momo was shocked to learn that her friend had been dumped but found it funny that she was dumped for someone he met on the online game they both played. However, she told Akane not to spend her days being sad over a worthless loser with a tiny sausage and advised her to pick herself up so her daily life wasn't affected. After Momo left to attend class, Akane logged into FOS, the game she and her ex used to play together. When she noticed that he'd unfriended her in the game, she began feeling irritated and annoyed. So she decided to take her annoyance out in the game and went hunting in anger. While doing this, she met a bored-looking character who she learned was her guildmate, Yamada, so she decided to chat with him. However, he responded to her messages with straightforward answers and asked if she was out hunting for a rare item. Akane replied that she wasn't and went ahead to tell him that she was out hunting because she'd gotten dumped, but the bored Afro-elf honestly didn't care about her sad sob story. He then asked her to let him have the hunting ground because he wanted to use it, which pissed her off even more, so she poured out her anger on him. However, Yamada still didn't care about the things she said as all he wanted was the hunting ground, so Akane logged out in anger. While she was calming her nerves by drinking some tea, a notification from the game popped up, informing her of the upcoming first anniversary event of the game. This made her think of her ex, and she wondered if he'd attend the event with his new girl. The following week, Akane went to school, and as she and Momo walked to class, she invited Momo to go shopping later. Momo asked why she was suddenly in the mood to go shopping, and she explained that she would be attending an event she knew her ex would be at. She said she wanted him to regret dumping her when he saw her looking all dressed, causing Momo to tease her for still being hung up over an insignificant NPC. Nevertheless, she accompanied her to the mall to shop and properly prep for her revenge game. When the day of the event arrived, Akane dressed up in her new clothes and attended it. She was impressed by the crowd and wondered if they were all almost bankrupt like her, and as she walked around, she heard a girl call her ex's name. When she turned around, she saw him standing there looking like all her bad decisions. Still, she couldn't help but admire him. The admiration soon faded like your hairline when he began walking with his new girl, so she tried chasing after them shamelessly. Unfortunately, she bumped into someone and fell, making her realize how stupid she was for trying to get her ex's attention. She was just about to start crying when the person she bumped into asked if she was doing okay. The sound of his voice made her look at him, and when she saw how drop-dead gorgeous he looked holding her shoe, she immediately got up off the ground and told him she was fine. After she put on her shoe, she tried to explain why she'd bumped into him, but the guy looked so uninterested that she apologized. He straight-faced said he wasn't interested, and as he began walking away, that's when she got a deja vu of nonchalance, which was similar to her in-game conversation with Yamada. Without thinking, she called him Yamada, and surprisingly the guy turned around and asked who she was. Before she could respond, she heard the surprised voice of her ex and turned around to see him standing nearby with his new girl. Quickly, Akane tried to act like she was surprised to see them, but her ex ignored her and rushed to greet Yamada instead.
Emotional damage!
It turns out that Yamada was a famous pro gamer and her ex was one of his fans. Not wanting to be ignored further, Akane inserted herself into the conversation, and when her ex finally noticed her, she pretended that Yamada was her new boyfriend, which of course he tried to deny, but Akane desperately begged him to play along and bribed him with the rare item pin code she got for attending the event. Her ex was surprised but jealous because he couldn't understand how Akane had managed to get close to Yamada and even date him when he, a loyal fan of Yamada, had never even received a like on the comments he leaves under his videos. Seeing his depressed mood, his vacuum cleaner girlfriend tried to cheer him up, and that just made Akane remember how replaceable she was. Hoping to drown out her sorrows, she invited Yamada to go drinking with her and talked his ears off when she began complaining about how her ex and his new girlfriend were flaunting their relationship in her face. Of course, Yamada didn't care about her sad girl stories and just wanted to go home. Eventually, she stopped talking about herself and pointed out that Yamada's bluntness and nonchalance would make girls avoid him like a plague. Yamada then revealed that he didn't mind others' opinions about him since he'd never even had a girlfriend, which surprised her. She asked why a walking chick magnet like him had been single all his life, and he admitted it was because he couldn't be bothered to deal with girls and their problems. Akane couldn't believe all his good looks were going to waste, however, because of what happened to her. She agreed that romance might be a bit overrated. Realizing that she was starting to think about her good-for-nothing cheater of an ex, she excused herself to go to the bathroom. While there, she noticed her clothes were dirty and that she'd scraped her leg because of her fall earlier, but she didn't mind. All she could think about was how much she regretted going to the event. When she returned to the restaurant, she saw that Yamada was gone, and that made her feel sad as she didn't want to be alone. Just as she was about to start crying about how pathetic her life now was, Yamada returned. Ignoring the look of shock she wore, he asked her to sit, and then placed a band-aid on her scraped leg. He explained that he'd gone out to buy the band-aid when he noticed the scrape. Akane felt overwhelmed by his kind gesture, and before he knew it, she was ugly crying again and insisting he stick around and drink with her. The next morning, Akane woke with hungover in a room she didn't recognize, and the most shocking part of it was that Yamada was there gaming. The shock of seeing him caused her to fall out of bed, and that's when her still brooding brain led her to believe she'd slept with him. Yamada assured her that nothing happened between them, as he wasn't one of those cultured degenerates who took drunk women to bed. He'd explained that she'd passed out in the restaurant after drinking like a sailor, and he had no choice but to bring her to his place since he didn't know where she lived. Akane thanked him for not abandoning her on the street to choke on her vomit and apologized for inconveniencing him. Yamada told her that if it was truly sorry, she'd leave, and as she got up, he informed her that she would find her shirt in the bathroom because he washed it after she offloaded her dinner on it. He also told her that he'd paid her bill at the restaurant, and Akane immediately offered to pay him back. A few minutes later, Yamada shut the door in Akane's face and told her that he hoped he never saw her again. Embarrassed, Akane did the walk of shame home, even though her night hadn't involved an intense workout session. After she arrived home, she took a shower to get rid of the smell of booze and vomit. As she lay in bed later, massaging her face, she suddenly realized that her necklace was missing. She rushed to the bathroom to search for it, and when she couldn't find it, she checked her purse. Unfortunately, it wasn't there either, but she figured it could have fallen at Yamada's apartment, so she logged into FOS to ask if he'd seen it. Yamada wasn't online, making her feel bummed out as she badly wanted to find her necklace. It was a present from her stupid ex, and even though they had broken up, she still felt attached to it. Eventually, her attention was drawn back to the game when Muriam, the guild master of her guild, sent her a message. Muriam asked if she was okay, and after Akane admitted she wasn't, Ruheim offered to hear her out. Akane then launched into the story of how she got dumped and lost her previous necklace. While they were talking, Yamada came online, so Akane asked if he'd seen her necklace in his house. Yamada replied that he hadn't and was about to go hunting, but Ruheim begged him to stay and chat with them so Akane would stop feeling sad. Yamada refused and said there were more important things to discuss, like why the guild's storage was always filled with useless items. He said he always cleaned it out, but unfortunately, some clueless moron always filled it up again. That clueless moron happened to be Akane, and when she admitted this to them, they were shocked. Ruheim tried to make her feel better because she knew Akane felt bad because of the things Yamada said, but Yamada bluntly told her to stop putting trash in their storage. He advised her to be more selective and only keep things that had value. But the harsh way he gave this advice made Akane feel more stupid than Goku and Luffy put together, so she logged out of the game. After Ruheim scolded Yamada for his harshness, he also logged out of the game. However, when he got up from his chair, he stepped on something sharp, and when he checked to see what it was, he realized it was Akane's necklace, and he'd broken it. A few days later, she had lunch with Momo, and while they ate, Akane brought up the topic of her missing necklace. Momo asked why she was still hung up about a gift she'd gotten from a guy who didn't think twice before he cheated on her and then dumped her. Akane tried to explain herself, but Momo didn't let her and told her about how pathetic she was being. Later, as Akane headed home, she spotted two girls talking to a Yamada and heard him reject the one trying to confess to him. When he walked away from the girls, she approached him and reprimanded him for the way he spoke to the girls, saying he should have been nicer. As they walked to the exit together, Akane learned that Yamada was still in school. She tried to make small talk with him, but soon stopped after she realized that she'd had a more interesting conversation with Suri. Suddenly, Yamada stopped walking and brought out a handkerchief, which he unwrapped to reveal Akane's broken necklace inside. He apologized for breaking it, but Akane told him not to be and said she'd been thinking of throwing it away. Soon, they exited the station, and Akane bid Yamada farewell before dashing towards her apartment in the rain. However, Yamada stopped her before she could go far and gave her his umbrella, insisting that she use it when she tried to reject it. The following day, Akane lay in bed holding her broken necklace when the doorbell rang, so she ran to answer the door. It turned out to be a delivery from her mother, and all the boxes contained the things she left at home. In the note her mother attached to the boxes, she informed her that she cleared out her old room because she wanted to use it as a training room. Troubled by the number of boxes sitting in her room, Akane called Momo over and begged her to help her sort the things out. Momo's immediate response was that she get rid of everything, but Akane, being a sentimental drama queen, cried and refused to do it. In the end, Momo won, and Akane packed everything up so she could throw them away. While she was arranging the last trash bag, Momo showed her the broken necklace and Yamada's umbrella. She asked Akane what she wanted to do with them, and Akane was about to tell her she wanted to keep them, but remembered what Yamada told her about being selective. This made her decide to toss the necklace, as she realized it made no sense for her to hold on to things out of sentiment. After depositing the trash bags at the refuse place, Momo suggested they go drinking to lighten Akane's mood. A few hours later, both girls showed up drunk at Yamada's doorstep, and Akane told him she'd come to return his umbrella. Yamada was annoyed that they had interrupted his sleep, but the girls were too drunk to care, and Momo even tried to convince him to date her with marriage in mind. Ignoring her friend's shameless drunken proposal, Akane told Yamada that aside from returning his umbrella, she had come to thank him for everything he did for her. She then pulled Momo off him and began leading her away, but Yamada called out to her before they could go far. He told her to try logging into FOS, as Rurihime was worried about her because she hadn't logged into the game since the date he scolded her. Akane understood that it was his way of apologizing for his harshness and assured him she'd log in as soon as she got home. A few weeks later, Akane went on a group date with Momo, but she was so uncomfortable that she tried to convince Momo to let her leave. When Momo refused, she settled for using her phone, and that was when one of the guys they were out with tried to shoot his shot. He told her he'd heard she liked games and asked her to tell him the name of the one she was currently into so they could play together, since he also liked games. She told him it was an online game, and after she said the name, it quickly became obvious he was as clueless as most of you are when it comes to finding the G-spot. An hour or so later, after the date ended, Momo complained about how Akane spent all her time playing on her phone instead of mingling with the guys. Akane apologized and explained that she'd been chatting with Rurihime, which made Momo ask why she thought it was wise to give her contact to a stranger she met online. Akane told her that Rurihime wasn't a stranger and showed her their message thread while explaining how cute her character was. Momo found it odd and asked Akane how sure she was that Rurihime wasn't some cultured middle-aged creep pretending to be a girl online. This made Akane a bit worried, so after Momo left, she began to question her decision to share her contact with someone she'd never seen before. Later, after she got home and changed into her pajamas, she excitedly booted up her computer to play FOS. While she waited, she suddenly realized she was more excited about playing FOS than she was to go on that group date, and it made her wonder if she was slowly becoming a full-fledged geek. She quickly pushed those thoughts aside and logged into the game, but was disappointed to find the guild hall as empty as the inside of Inosuke's head. However, when she began looking around, she spotted Yamada and Rurihime outside, working on a potion. She tried to get their attention, but the two were so deep in their conversation that they didn't notice she'd logged in. Akane didn't try to butt into their conversation and just read their messages where Rurihime talked about how nice it was that it was just her and Yamada online. Akane was shocked and wondered if Rurihime was Yamada's girlfriend, but didn't know if she should say anything. Just then, Yamada pointed out to Rurihime that Akane was online, and Rurihime happily welcomed her. Akane apologized for interrupting their conversation, but Rurihime assured her that she wasn't interrupting anything. As both girls began conversing, Yamada told them he was logging off and Rurihime bid him farewell, promising to call him later. This statement further solidified Akane's theory that Yamada and Rurihime were a couple, and for some reason, she felt sad about it. It bothered her so much that the next day while she was in class, she considered cyberstalking Yamada to find clues about his supposed relationship. After class, she was walking home when the guy who had been trying to rizz her up during the group date called out to her. Akane recognized him but couldn't remember his name even though she tried to. As they began walking to the station together, the guy talked about FOS, trying to prove that he wasn't a clueless noob when it came to video games. Akane wasn't remotely interested in what he was yapping about, however. She figured since he was a guy and guys like video games, he'd have heard about Yamada. Unfortunately, when she asked him if he knew who Yamada was, he didn't, and that just made the uneasiness she felt increase. When they arrived at the station, Sir Yapper-a-Lot was still talking, but Akane's attention was drawn to Rurihime's look-alike, who ran past them. She kept her eyes on the girl and was surprised when she saw her approaching Yamada. As she watched them walk away, she recalled Yamada, telling her he'd never had a girlfriend and assumed he'd lied about it. The restless guy soon noticed she wasn't paying attention to him anymore and asked if everything was alright, saying she had somewhere to be before walking away. He tried to call out to her, but she wasn't listening as her mind was on Yamada and the girl she assumed was Ruriheim. The thought that they might really be a couple rattled her for some reason. That night as lay in bed, she received a text from Ruriheim, informing her that a collaboration cafe for FOS was opening the following month. She said she wanted their members to visit the cafe and told her that Yamada already agreed to come since they met up earlier. This confirmed Akane's suspicion that the girl she'd seen with Yamada was indeed Ruriheim. However, she chose not to believe they were an item and texted Ruriheim back, agreeing to go to the cafe with them. A month later, on a hangout day, Ruriheim sent Akane a text, reminding her of their plans. Akane quickly got ready and on the train ride over, she texted Momo to let her know where she was going. Momo wasn't comfortable with Akane meeting up with a bunch of strangers, who might very well be axe murderers, but Akane assured her she would be fine since Yamada would also be there. After leaving the train station, Akane tried to locate the cafe using her map, but she happened to be more directionally challenged than Zoro and kept getting lost. When she tried to figure out where she was, someone bumped into her, causing her to drop her phone. The guy who bumped into her quickly apologized, and when he bent to pick up the phone, he saw the pinned location on her map. He asked if she was heading to the FOS cafe and Akane told him yes, so he offered to show her the way since he was also going there. As they walked, Akane began questioning her decision to accept the stranger's offer. However, when he began geeking out about the games he loved, she became calm. When he settled down, he asked what she thought about FOS and Akane admitted that she was still very new to the game, adding that she even got scolded recently for putting trash in her guild storage. This statement made the guy look at her in surprise, but they were interrupted by someone calling the guy's name. When Akane saw the girl was Ruriheim, she was happy but became happier when she spotted Yamada standing close to the girl and talking to a small man. Excitedly, she crossed the road and rushed to say hello to him. However, while she was speaking to him, Ruriheim came to stand beside Yamada and held his shirt possessively. Her heated stare made Akane nervous, but she greeted her sweetly and tried to introduce herself to her. The girl just kept staring at her in annoyance, making Akane wonder if she was an alternate version of Wednesday Addams. The next moment, the girl addressed the guy Akane came with, asking him who Akane was. The guy, whose name was Hada, smiled and replied that Akane was their guildmate. Eventually, the group went into the cafe, and after they occupied a table, Hada and the small man discussed what they wanted to order. Akane couldn't help but feel out of place, as the only people she knew were Yamada and Ruriheim, who was giving her the cold shoulder. Still, she tried to strike up a conversation with her and asked who Hada and the strange little man were. Ruriheim rudely replied that the guy was Hada and the jolly fat man was Mr. Komoda, so Akane asked if she could tell her more about them. Ruriheim ignored her question and rudely asked who she was and why she kept calling her Ruriheim, stating that her character name wasn't Ruriheim, which surprised Akane. Just then, Yamada spoke up and suggested that everyone at the table introduce themselves, so Hada went first. He introduced himself to Akane and told her that he was the one who played Ruriheim in the game, which shocked Akane beyond words. The only word she could utter was nakama, which was a word used to describe guys who pretended to be women online. Hada argued that he wasn't a nakama and poetically explained that he and his character Ruriheim were the same even though they were different. Akane didn't find his revelation nor his explanation funny and accused him of deceiving her into sharing her contact with him. Hada told her to calm her barely visible plots down and said that the person she exchanged contacts with and confided in was Ruriheim and not him. Of course, this was a stupid thing to say, but Akane didn't try to point this out and just slumped back into her seat in despair. The next person to introduce himself was Mr. Komoda, and he explained that the reason Akane had never met his character was because he spent his time in the dungeons. He then introduced the rude loli as Runa, Hada's younger sister and the model for Ruriheim. Runa didn't acknowledge what Komoda said, but when she heard him say Akane and Yamada were already acquainted, she spoke up, demanding to know how they knew each other. Akane explained that they had met at an event, but that just made Runa glare at her more. Ignoring Runa's murderous glare, Akane admitted to Yamada that she'd assumed he and Ruriheim were a couple because of how they flirted with each other in the game. Yamada explained that Hada was his upperclassman, so whenever he was in character, he had to follow his instructions, even though his behavior in the game was sus as hell. Akane sympathized with him and said because of how clingy Rurihin was to him in the game. She thought he'd lied to her about never having a girlfriend before. Yamada told her that he wouldn't lie about something like that, and Akane said she was glad, but quickly realized she shouldn't have said that. Runa had heard her, and the girl wasn't happy about the statement, so she outright asked Akane if she was secretly in love with Yamada. Before Akane could respond, Hada clamped a hand over Runa's mouth and apologized to Akane for her rudeness, saying that Runa was a bit territorial about the people she cared about. Because of this, Runa turned her anger on her brother and told him to keep his walking hand far away from her lips. Ignoring the siblings, Akane picked up her glass and tried to calm herself. However, she panicked and dropped it when she noticed Yamada staring at her. She tried to gather the broken pieces, but Yamada pushed her hand away and told her to let the staff handle the mess as she could get hurt. Akane felt embarrassed and quickly turned away from him, so he wouldn't see that the difference between her face and a fire truck was its structure. She remained in that position for a while until Yamada excused himself to make a phone call outside. After she retook her seat, Hada also excused himself, and Komoda tried to help Akane relax by talking to her about their guild. He explained that they had all been guildmates in another game and had begun playing FOS because Hada had insisted on it. He said the reason she didn't know Runa was because Runa only logged in once in a while. When he mentioned that Hada had been excited about meeting Akane in real life, Runa lost it and accused Akane of trying to entice her brother the same way she did with Yamada. Meanwhile, Hada went to meet Yamada outside and asked why he'd lied about making a phone call. Yamada explained that he left because he got the feeling that Akane didn't want him around, causing Hada to call him a dense fool. He then told his dim-witted friend that Akane had avoided looking at him because she felt embarrassed, but as he expected, Yamada couldn't understand why she'd be embarrassed by what happened. Hada didn't try explaining it to him and changed the topic to how different Akane was from how Yamada had described her. Yamada told him that his description was on point, but Hada argued that it wasn't, and said if Yamada didn't start paying attention to girls, he'd die a single miserable gamer boy. After lunch, the group stood outside, and while Akane spoke to Hada and Yamada, Runa told Komoda that she didn't like Akane because she was nothing more than a desperate hussy. Komoda was shocked that she'd uttered such words, but Runa ignored him and told herself that she would kick Akane out of their guild because she didn't belong there. After everyone went their separate ways, Akane and Yamada took the same train since they lived in the same area. On the way, the train suddenly lurched, causing Akane to fall into Yamada's chest to steady herself, so he suggested that they swap places to avoid it happening again. When they did, Akane noticed that most of the women on the train were staring at Yamada, and she couldn't blame them as she had also gawked at him the first time they met. Her thoughts soon moved to Runa's question about her feelings for Yamada, and wondered why the girl had thought that. To occupy her mind, she started another conversation with Yamada, asking what he would have for dinner, and he told her pudding. Akane laughed at this, thinking he was joking. However, he proved how serious he was when he bought the pudding after they left the train station. As they walked together, she asked if he usually cooked his meals, and he admitted that he couldn't cook to save his life, so he survived on takeout and food from the convenience store. Akane didn't like this response, so she asked him to wait for 10 minutes by the bench they came across and rushed home to gather some food for him. When she returned, Yamada had already dozed off from boredom, so she dropped the bags on the bench and apologized for making him wait. She then showed him the things she brought and told him that she added some vegetables so he'd eat a healthy and balanced meal. Yamada tried to refuse the food, but Akane insisted and assured him that she was giving it to him from the bottom of her heart. Just then, her phone rang, so she answered it and was surprised to learn that it was Runa on the line. Runa apologized for her rude behavior earlier and explained that she'd gotten Akane's number from Hada because she wanted them to be friends. Akane happily agreed to be her friend, and the two made plans to meet up the following Saturday. When Runa hung up, the excited Akane told Yamada about their plans and said she couldn't wait for her and Runa to become friends. Later, after Yamada returned home, he thought about Akane's upcoming date with Runa and checked his calendar as something didn't sit right with him. On his calendar, it was written that he had a tutoring session with Runa that Saturday, so he assumed he'd misheard the day the girls were supposed to meet. Exactly 1 week later, Akane went to the meeting place, but Runa wasn't there, and she had sent a very sus man to go in her place. Akane felt uncomfortable with the man and tried to explain to him so many times that she wasn't Ruriheim, because he seemed to believe that she was. When he continued talking about how pleased he was that she was a girl and not a guy, Akane received a text from Runa. In her text, Runa explained she was running late and said that she'd asked her online gamer friend to keep her company until she arrived. Reading that text sent Akane into a semi-state of panic, as she couldn't believe she had to endure that creep of a man until Runa arrived. Immediately, she excused herself to go to the bathroom and locked herself in one of the stalls before trying to call Runa. Meanwhile, Yamada arrived at Heida's place to tutor Runa, and while he was flipping through her workbook, he asked if she'd made plans to go somewhere that day. Runa replied that she hadn't, but her phone began ringing at that moment, and when she saw it was Akane calling, so she quickly grabbed her phone and cut the call. Back in the cafe bathroom, Akane realized that Runa wasn't going to take her calls, so she sat down on the toilet seat, feeling dejected. Just as she tried to think of a way to handle the situation, her sus state began knocking on the door of her stall. Immediately, Akane's danger sensors activated and she became afraid of what might happen to her. The worst part was that when she refused to open the door, the man began trying to force it open. At the same time in Runa's room, she admitted to Yamada that she stood Akane up, but refused to accept that she was wrong to send someone she didn't know in her place. Yamada asked how she met the guy and she explained that he was one of Rurihim's diehard fans, and she chatted with him using Heida's account. After listening to her, Yamada turned to leave, but the moment he opened the door, he met Heida standing there with snacks. Heida tried to joke with the duo in the room, but quickly deduced that something was wrong when he saw their faces. After Yamada explained the situation, Heida logged into his account and confirmed that Runa had messaged the man from his computer. All the boys checked the details of the messages. Runa looked at pictures of herself, Heida, Yamada, and Komoda on her phone. The spoiled brat couldn't understand why it couldn't just be the four of them in their guild as it had always been before. A few moments later, a frantic Komoda showed up at their front door, asking questions about Akane's whereabouts since Heida had lied to him that she'd been kidnapped, so he'd come to help them. Soon the four of them loaded up in Komoda's van and the little man channeled his inner Dominic Toretto, so they could get to the location of the cafe fast. While Yamada tried to convince Komoda to stop driving fast and furious, Heida scolded Runa for what she did. He said her attitude was the reason she had no friends at school, but Runa said she didn't care because she had 300 online friends. She told Heida that she didn't see what was so special about Akane, as they were all concerned about her. Instead of responding to her question, Heida asked if Akane had tried to befriend her, but Runa didn't answer him. Later, when they arrived at the place, Yamada was the first to spot Akane and her date. However, he sensed that something was wrong. Before he could call out to her, a crying Komoda rushed to their table, and after confirming that Akane was fine, he turned to face the man. He threatened to take the man to court if he'd done anything to Akane. But this confused both the man and Akane. Thankfully, Heida and Yamada got closer and Heida explained that they had come because they were worried that the person Runa sent to meet her was a certified sleazeball. Yamada noticed that Akane had a bandage around her leg and asked what happened. The bespectacled idiot said he was to blame and explained that Akane had hit her knee against the toilet bowl after he startled her in the bathroom. Hearing that he went into the women's bathroom, Heida grabbed him by his tie and demanded he explain why he went in there in the first place. He explained that he'd been worried when she didn't return to their table, so he went in to make sure she hadn't fainted and hit her head. His manner of approach was what led to Akane's accident, so he got the bandages to help relieve the pain. Heida asked if his stupidity was hereditary or something he'd acquired along the line because everyone knew it was wrong for a guy to waltz into the women's bathroom like he owned the place. The guy didn't seem to see anything wrong in his actions and complained that Heida was being unnecessarily rude to him. Heida didn't care and kept scolding him, so Akane turned her attention to Yamada, who had been mimicking a mannequin since he asked about her leg. Yamada then apologized and said if he'd told her before that he was tutoring Runa that Saturday none of these things would have happened. Akane was surprised to learn he was Runa's tutor and deluded herself into believing that Runa had been running late for their date because she was being tutored. Deep down, she knew it was a lie, but because she badly wanted to believe Runa was her friend, she didn't reprimand Runa when she saw her. Runa felt uncomfortable with the situation and ran off, so Akane tried to run after her, but couldn't because her legs started hurting. When Runa heard her cry out in pain, he ran back to the cafe and asked Akane if she was alright. Just as Akane was about to respond, Heida interrupted her and instructed Runa to follow him, saying he was going to lecture her. Runa turned to Yamada and tried to reach for him, but he told her that he wasn't going to save her this time around. Heida then grabbed her hand and began pulling her away, but stopped when Akane cried out in pain. Akane claimed her insides felt like boiling acid and begged Heida to run to a nearby store to get her some painkillers. She convinced Yamada and Komoda to go with him, asked the unnamed man to get lost, and insisted that Runa stay back to rub her belly until they returned. Once it was just the two girls left, Akane reclaimed her seat, but Runa remained standing with a haunted look on her face until Akane asked what level she was in FOS. Runa was surprised by her question and took a few seconds to respond. However, when Akane kept talking about the game, she snapped. She asked why she was acting like everything was okay when it wasn't, and admitted that she'd stood Akane up because she didn't like her and wanted her to lead their guild. Akane was silent for a few seconds, but after recalling how Runa rushed to her side when she heard her cry out in pain, she spoke up. She told Runa she would leave the scolding at Hada and said she'd come out hoping the two of them could be friends. Runa began crying and apologizing because hadn't expected Akane to be nice to her when she'd been nothing but mean to her. A few minutes later, the guys returned and they were surprised to see Akane comforting Runa. A few days later, Runa visited Akane, and while she instructed Akane on how to beat a level in FOS, Momo sat with them and kept talking about how hard being single was. When she realized they weren't listening to her, she complained and said Akane ought to be worried about the lack of a man in her life instead of playing games with a runaway kid. Akane explained that Runa only dropped by because things between her and Hada were still tense and she didn't want to face him yet. Momo said it didn't matter and added that if Runa wanted to spend time away from home, she should do it with kids her age. This made Runa tell her to stop acting like a bitter old maid and advise her to go home if she was getting bored of watching them play games. Momo responded by not so subtly threatening Runa to shut up. So the terrified girl ran into Akane's arms seeking comfort and got a bag of chips instead. While Runa ate her chips, Akane went back to playing her game, and Momo began asking her about Yamada. Akane explained that Yamada was nothing more than a friend to her, and added that he had been helping her a lot in the game. Runa said it was because Yamada was born nice, and added that he still found time to tutor her, even though he was studying for his entrance exams. This piqued Momo's interest, and soon both girls began gossiping about Yamada, and how he'd never had a girlfriend even though he was fine as hell. Akane continued playing her game, ignoring the two, and as she did that she was notified that Yamada had logged in. Immediately, she began chatting with him and telling him about how she'd leveled up so far. She even showed off her shoes, but in his usual fashion, Yamada pointed out that she used the wrong materials to upgrade them. Akane became sad that she had to spend her precious gems to correct the mistake. So, Yamada offered to give her his spare shoes, but she refused to take them. She said she wanted to earn the germs herself and told him she was going hunting to gather them. Yamada then wished her good luck and even added a smiling emoji to show that he was rooting for her. This action made Akane scream in shock, as she'd always been convinced that Yamada wasn't programmed to show emotions. Suddenly, Momo tackled her away from her laptop, and as Akane struggled to break free of her, she begged her to forget about the game. Akane refused and rushed back to her laptop to continue her game, but suddenly it short-circuited and began smoking. That night, while Runa was watching television, Hada walked in and told him about what happened to Akane's laptop. Hada deduced that it broke down because the latest FOS update had overwhelmed it. Runa said she felt sorry for Akane because until she saved up enough money to buy a new system, she couldn't play FOS. The next day, Akane was forced to read her books, and that made her cry because she'd rather be playing FOS. Just then, someone knocked on the door, and when she went to answer it, she was surprised to find Yamada and Runa. Runa explained that she'd brought Yamada over to check on her laptop. It so happened that Hada had called Yamada the night before and asked him to drop by Akane's place after tutoring Runa and take a look at her laptop. Yamada didn't want to do it, but when he remembered how excited Akane had been when she talked about upgrading her shoes, he changed his mind. Back in the present, Yamada warned Akane not to get her hopes up that she fixed her laptop, as he wasn't a tech genius like Tony Stark. When he began checking out the computer, Akane excused herself to get them some snacks, but Runa followed her and pointed out that her washed underwear was on full display in the room. Immediately, Akane rushed to collect them and deposited them into her laundry basket, thanking her stars that Yamada hadn't noticed them. She then went to get the snacks, and as she was pouring the juice into the cups, she asked if they would like her to prepare lunch for them. They both said yes, and Yamada admitted that he'd enjoyed the curry she gave him the other day, which made them smile. Runa didn't know what they were talking about, but seeing their interaction compelled her to take a photo and send it to Hada. Hada texted back and asked Runa if she wanted to play Cupid. So Runa asked what he had in mind. He told her it would be nice if things between the two played out like a love comedy, but Runa misinterpreted his words. She then tried to force Akane and Yamada to be together by pushing Akane towards Yamada, causing her hair clip to poke him in the face. When Akane realized what had happened, she grabbed hold of Yamada's face to check if her hair clip hadn't made him blind. She didn't even notice how close their faces were until Yamada insisted that he was fine and asked her to back away. Thinking he was annoyed that she touched him, she apologized and instructed Runa to do the same since she caused the entire thing. Yamada assured the girls that he was fine and then got up, saying he was going home to get some things he needed to fix her computer. After the door shut behind him, Runa pointed out that the way he left looked like he was running away, causing Akane to think that he hated the fact that she invaded his personal space. When Yamada returned to Akane's place, he found a plate of food waiting for him and saw that both girls were sleeping. He then decided to work as quietly as he could so he wouldn't wake the sleeping beauties up. One of his screwdrivers fell and rolled close to Akane, but thankfully she was too deep in her sleep to hear it. After picking it up, Yamada found himself staring at Akane's sleeping form, and that was when he noticed she clipped her hair back up. So without thinking, he removed the clip, allowing her hair to fall. The next moment, someone rang the doorbell, and when he opened the door, he found Akane's ex standing there. The guy was shocked to see Yamada, and asked what he was doing there as he hadn't bought the story that they were dating. When Yamada didn't respond, he told him that he'd come to return all the containers Akane used to pack lunch for him when they were still dating. He admitted that seeing the containers made him worried that Akane wasn't doing well, and he thought that if he could see her again, he'd have some peace of mind. Yamada told him not to worry as Akane was doing just fine without him, so he handed the bag to Yamada and begged him not to tell Akane he dropped by. He said if she asked where the containers came from, Yamada should tell her that he found them by the door. After he left, Akane opened the door, and when Yamada fed her the lie that her ex asked him to, she started laughing. When they went back inside, Yamada returned her hair clip to her and admitted that he'd taken it off while she slept. Akane was surprised and asked why he'd done it, and he said he wasn't sure why, which made her feel a bit giddy. A few days later, Akane interviewed for a job at a convenience store, and on her way back home, she called Momo to tell her about it. Momo asked why she'd applied for the job when she didn't need the extra money again now that Yamada had fixed her computer, and she said it was because she still wanted to pay him back. She explained that most of the parts he used were given to him by Hada, and she wanted to at least give them part of the money for it. Momo then wished her good luck with her new job and said she had to hang up because she was on a group date with some of her friends. Later, Akane logged into FOS and met Rurihime sitting alone in the guild hall, so she went to speak with her. While they chatted, she learned that Rurihime wasn't alone as she'd been discussing with Komoda, whose in-game character was a very tiny floating sheep-like creature. After recovering from the shock of seeing the tiny creature, Akane asked Rurihime how much she would pay back for the parts she received for her computer, and Rurihime told her to forget about it. Still, Akane insisted on paying her back, so Komoda suggested she do so by helping them with the plan they were discussing before she logged in. Meanwhile, at Yamada's school, the students were preparing for the upcoming school festival, and Yamada stepped out to throw away the trash. A group of girls saw him and began discussing if they should approach him or not, but before they could decide, one of his friends joined him. The boy tried to convince him to join the pageant, saying he would win because he had so many adoring fans, but Yamada refused. Just as they finished dropping off the trash, someone called out to Yamada from their classroom and informed him that his phone was ringing. When he returned to class, he found his phone sitting on a small towel on top of his desk in Sabaki. The girl sitting next to him explained that she put the towel under it because it was vibrating too much. Yamada apologized, and after he returned her towel to her, she told him that she'd watched his live gameplay the night before. She said his aims were too sloppy and his reactions were too slow, and asked if he was losing his edge because he spent so much time playing FOS now. Yamada tried to explain that the servers were overloaded and caused him to lag, but Tsubaki said only incompetent losers came up with excuses to justify their losses. This shut him, and when she didn't say anything else, he turned his attention to the message Hada left on the guild group chat. In the message, he asked Yamada to get tickets for all the guild members, stating that Akane was sponsoring everyone. Days later, Akane met Komoda and Runa outside Yamada's school for the festival, and the three of them went in together. As they walked around, they spotted Hada, but chose to act like they didn't know him, because the silly boy had on a pair of rabbit ears. Akane then asked Runa what she wanted to eat, and Runa said she didn't want anything. Confused as to why she turned down food, Akane looked to Komoda for an explanation, and he told her that Runa was a bit nervous, because she remembered she had to take the entrance exam to the school the following year. Akane tried to cheer her up and Komodo assured her that she'd ace the exams. However, she continued walking around with them. And when Haida suggested they visit the haunted house, she refused to go and clung to Akane like a baby koala. Akane tried to get Runa to cheer up by asking what attraction she wanted to visit, but Runa wasn't in the mood. She told Akane that her stomach hurt, so Akane took her to the bathroom, and while she waited outside, she got a text from Haida saying they should all meet outside in 15 minutes. Akane thought of texting Yamada to find out if he'd join them later, but decided against doing so when it crossed her mind that he might think she was dying to see him. As she began putting her phone away, she heard the sound of boxes falling, and when she looked up, she noticed Yamada helping his classmates carry the boxes. She tried to call out to him, but a male student beat her to it, so she stood back and watched him, secretly hoping he'd look her way, but he didn't. After he disappeared into the class, she returned to her spot next to the bathroom door, and soon became worried because Runa was taking forever. Just as she turned to go look for Runa, Yamada suddenly appeared behind her and reached for her shoulder. Akane turned around when she sensed his presence and asked how he knew she was there. He explained that he'd spotted her earlier and was going to call out to her. But then the thing with the boxes happened. Akane felt happy that he'd noticed her and even thought of approaching her, so she smiled, causing Yamada to ask if she'd been smoking Joker gas. Akane ignored his question and asked him to wait while she checked on Runa, who had been holed up in the bathroom for ages. Unknown to them, Tsubaki was watching their interaction from the classroom with curiosity. Later, they both took Runa to the nurse's office because she was still having stomach issues. Yamada tried to send Haida a text to let him know what was happening, but Runa jumped on him and took his phone away. She told him she didn't want Haida to know she was feeling sick because he'd make her go home, and she wasn't ready to go home until she'd pigged out on all the food she could eat. Akane then promised to buy her anything she wanted. So Runa listed the things she wanted and insisted she get her t-shirt too. Yamada offered to go with Akane since he knew where to get the t-shirt, but as they walked through the hallway, all the students began staring at them and whispering among themselves. Akane felt uncomfortable with the attention, but there was nothing she could do since Yamada was more or less the Gojo sector of the school. When she tried to walk faster, Yamada accidentally bumped into his PE teacher, and the man began teasing him about walking around with the girl. He asked Akane what school she attended, and she told him she was a college student, causing the man to say he didn't know Yamada had a thing for older girls. After the man walked away, some first-year students rushed over to Yamada and Akane and asked if they were dating. Akane told them they weren't dating, but the girls kept asking questions as they wanted to be sure their Prince Charming was single and straighter than the pole your girl dances on. Eventually, Yamada and Akane made it outside and collapsed on some benches after answering questions left and right. When Haida and Komodo were found sitting down there like their life force had been drained, Haida laughed at them. He explained to Akane that Runa went through the same ordeal the year before when the girls saw her walking around with Yamada. He then suggested that Akane and Yamada start dating for real so that Yamada's fangirls would leave him alone. Akane was shocked by his outrageous suggestion, but Yamada remained indifferent as he was yet to grasp the fact that Haida was teasing them. Haida laughed at this, but stopped when he noticed Akane was redder than a tomato. He quickly apologized, saying it was a joke, but Akane was too embarrassed to listen to him and said she was going to get Runa's food. After she stormed off, Haida thought about going after her to apologize, but Yamada beat him to it and rushed after Akane. Speaking of Akane, the poor girl was having a meltdown as she couldn't understand why Haida had decided to tease them or why Yamada hadn't said anything. When she noticed Yamada was following her, she sped up, hoping to avoid him and accidentally bumped into Tsubaki. She quickly apologized and ran off. Just then, she saw Yamada and tried to ask if he knew what was wrong with Akane, but he ignored her and called out to Akane, asking her to wait. Akane listened, and when she turned around, he warned her to be careful as she could trip on the stairs if she continued running. Tsubaki understood that she wasn't needed, so she excused herself and went back to what she'd been doing before. Yamada then approached Akane and apologized for what happened outside, but it seemed that Akane had forgotten about it because she pointed out that it was the first time since they'd met that he said her name. Yamada said it was impossible, but she argued that she was right. Her uncontrolled yapping drew people's attention to them, which made her so uncomfortable that she didn't think twice before grabbing Yamada and running upstairs. When they were finally alone, she apologized for dragging him to a deserted area, explaining that all the stairs they were getting overwhelmed her. Yamada accepted her apologies and then apologized again for what happened outside. Akane told him she wasn't angry, which confused him because he thought that she was. So she explained that she ran off because she was embarrassed. Innocently, Yamada asked why she felt embarrassed, but she refused to tell him and said all that mattered was that she wasn't angry, choosing to respect her decision not to talk about what made her feel embarrassed. He began walking away, but Akane stopped him. She asked what he would have done if she'd agreed to Heida's suggestion that they start dating. Yamada was quiet for a while, and just when it looked like he'd come up with an answer, Akane panicked and told him the question had been a joke. When she began walking away, Yamada spoke up and said if she'd agreed to Heida's suggestion, it would have been a real honor for him. He told her that a nobody like him didn't deserve to be with her, because she was way out of his league. Akane was so surprised by what he said that she didn't know how to respond to him, and just simply followed him to get the things Runa requested. A few days later, Yamada went to buy something at the convenience store where Akane worked, and after she handed him his purchase, she asked him to wait outside for her, because her shift was about to end. While he waited, Akane's co-worker asked Akane who Yamada was, and she told her he was her friend, but the woman was sure Akane had a crush on Yamada. Akane admitted she didn't know how she felt towards Yamada, and began wondering when her feelings towards him changed. Some minutes later, she clocked out, and as they walked together, she told him that she'd asked him to wait because she wanted to give him the bento she prepared for him. She said it was a thank you gift for fixing her computer. As they waited for the traffic light to turn green, Akane sneezed and quickly began searching her bag for a mask so she didn't give Yamada her germs. Since she wasn't paying attention to her surroundings, she didn't notice someone on a bike about to pass. Yamada had to pull her closer to himself to avoid her getting hit, but his touch made Akane go still for a moment. Eventually, she regained her senses, found her mask and put it on before turning her attention to Yamada. He didn't look affected, and didn't even notice that his touch had affected Akane. Sometime that evening, Akane met Runa in a park, and as soon as she took the swing beside Runa asked if she'd read the message Heida sent. Akane said yes, so Runa asked how she could be so calm when they were getting a new guild member. Akane told her she was looking forward to meeting their new guildmate, but Runa said she wasn't. She pulled out a notebook where she'd written down a plan to drive the new member away and tried to convince Akane to help her execute it, but Akane refused. Defeated, Runa admitted that she'd expected Akane to welcome the girl as she was no different from Heida, who threatened to scold her if she mistreated the new guild member. She said the new member was Yamada's classmate, and from what Heida told her, Yamada and the girl were kind of close. Akane was surprised to learn that Yamada had female friends, but Runa told her it wasn't time to dwell on that. She asked for Akane's phone so she could put Yamada's number in it and have Akane call him to ask about the new girl, since she knew he wouldn't tell her if she was the one who called. Meanwhile, Yamada was at his prep school with Tsubaki and Okamoto, and when his phone began to ring, he didn't pick up. His friends asked why he did that, and he said it was an unknown number, making Okamoto joke that it was a girl calling to confess her feelings for Yamada. A few hours later, classes were over and the trio began walking to the train station together. While Okamoto complained that he was hungry, Yamada stopped to call the unknown number back. To his surprise, it was Akane who answered, and while they were talking, she sneezed again. He asked if she was feeling okay, and she assured him that she was, but asked if they could talk another time because she was running late for work. After he hung up the phone, Tsubaki asked who he'd been talking to on the phone, and he told her it was Akane. Tsubaki remembered Akane from the school festival, and Yamada told her that she would get to hang out with Akane since she was also part of their guild. Out of curiosity, Tsubaki asked what kind of person Akane was, but Yamada couldn't say as he didn't know the best words to describe her. The next day, during Runa's tutoring session, Akane called her to tell her that she was sick and couldn't log into their game that night. Runa asked her to take care of herself before hanging up the phone and telling Yamada that Akane was sick. Meanwhile, in Akane's apartment, she was so sick that she struggled to get herself a glass of water, only to discover that she couldn't swallow because her throat hurt. She decided to take some pills, but remembered she hadn't eaten all day and thought it would be wise to run to the store in her condition when Momo didn't answer her calls. She forced herself to get dressed and leave the house, but she was too weak and fell when she attempted to mount her bike. She then decided she'd return to her apartment and order takeout, but unfortunately, she was too weak to put her fallen bike back up or even stand up. Just then, someone helped her with the bike, and when she looked up, she saw Yamada's silhouette. Thinking it was a hallucination, she tipped her head back and gave into darkness. Thankfully, Yamada caught her before she hit the ground and carried her back to her apartment. Meanwhile, Okamoto and Tsubaki were trying to call him as they were supposed to go to prep school together. When he didn't pick up, Okamoto jokingly said Yamato was too busy to answer his phone because he was with a girl. Tsubaki defended Yamada and said he wasn't the type who would blow off his schoolwork for a girl. Okamoto told her that people changed when they fell in love, and jokingly advised her to shoot her shot with Yamada before someone else snatched him away. Tsubaki replied that she was aware that she could lose Yamada at any moment, and to his surprise, she started crying. Tsubaki hadn't always liked Yamada. The first time she approached Yamada, it was because of a game they had played against each other. She assumed Yamada had cheated and demanded that he allow her to observe his gameplay, and he agreed. After she watched him play the game, she apologized for accusing him wrongly, and ever since that day, they became friends. However, her feelings for him remained platonic, and she felt bad for the girls who ended up heartbroken after confessing to him. One day in second grade, she asked Yamada why he kept turning girls down and told him that his continuous rejection of those girls made people question what team he batted for. Yamada told her that he wasn't into any of those girls, so she asked if he had a crush on someone and he said no. However, he told her about a girl he knew when he was younger, and said the girl was the first person to confess her feelings to him. This girl was always getting bullied by their classmates, so she often skipped school, and Yamada was the one their teacher always sent to drop off her assignments. Eventually, the girl started attending school again, but because the bullying continued, Yamada decided to stay by her side. One day, the girl asked if he could remain at her side forever, and Yamada honestly told her that he didn't think he could do it. This made the girl realize that he had only stayed with her out of kindness and pity, and not because he felt anything for her. The girl cried so much that day, and coincidentally, it was the last time he ever saw her, because she transferred schools. He told Tsubaki that he often thought about the girl and wondered if he could have avoided making her cry if he'd said something else or agreed to her request. Because of what happened with the girl and the thoughts that usually came when he remembered her, he began to feel uncomfortable around girls. That's why he's always so blunt with them and always rejecting their confessions. After listening to his story, Tsubaki swore never to fall for Yamada, as falling for him was equal to stabbing herself in the heart. Back in the present, Yamada tried to make Akane drink some water, but she couldn't swallow it and poured it onto her pillow. He removed the wet pillow and tried to cool her body down with a wet cloth, but it wasn't working, so he decided to take her to the emergency room. A few hours later, Akane woke up in her bed, feeling better than before, and wondered how she'd gotten back to her apartment. When she tried to get out of bed, she noticed Yamada sleeping on the floor and became so shocked that she walked over to the balcony door and opened it. The cold night breeze woke Yamada up, and when he saw Akane standing in front of the open door looking as white as a ghost, he got up to close it. As if on cue, she began sneezing again and had to use a handful of tissues to clean her nose. She then started panicking and asking Yamada why he was in her apartment when he ought to be staying as far away from her as possible to avoid getting her cold. Yamada told her he'd explain everything after she got back into bed, so she complied. Once she was settled into her bed, Yamada explained that he found her almost passed out by the bike racks when he came to check on her, which shocked her as she'd assumed she'd been dreaming when she saw him. Realizing that he'd helped her in her time of need, Akane became overwhelmed and burst into tears, causing Yamada to worry. She assured him that she was fine and thanked him for saving her life before acting all dramatic about it. After she calmed down, he gave the yogurt he bought, and when she was done eating it, she passed him the cup to keep. Unfortunately, her leg began cramping because she'd positioned it, and Akane cried out in pain. Yamada asked her to stretch out her leg, but she couldn't, so he pushed her blanket aside and got into the bed with her.
Yeah, boy.
When Akane realized what he was about to do, she began kicking her unhurt leg in the air, but Yamada avoided getting hit by it and focused on relieving the pain in her other leg. Once he was done, she calmed down, and he told her that she'd been overreacting for nothing. Akane just thanked him but noticed he was staring intently at her, and began to wonder what the look was about. Suddenly, he reached out his hand and she backed away in surprise, accidentally hitting her head in the process, only to realize he'd wanted to collect the yogurt spoon. Yamada laughed at her when this happened, and Akane complained and asked him to stop teasing her. In the morning, she thanked him for looking after her, but when he tried to walk out the door, she subconsciously grabbed his jacket, and when he asked if there was a problem, she quickly let go of the jacket and started apologizing. Yamada looked at her like she was losing it, but she assured him she was fine and asked him to head to school, so he did. Hours after Yamada left, Momo showed up for groceries and apologized to Akane for not returning her calls the previous night. Akane told her it was fine and explained that Yamada took care of her the entire night, which surprised Momo. so she asked if they were finally dating. Akane said they weren't, but Momo found it weird that a guy would spend the night taking care of a girl he had zero feelings for. Before taking her leave, Momo told Akane that timing was everything when it came to love, which left Akane feeling confused as she hadn't pegged Momo as a love guru. Later, after Akane had eaten and studied for a while, she logged into FOS, hoping to find Rurihime online so they could go hunting together. Thankfully, Rurihime was online, and she was with Tsubaki, so Akane joined them and excitedly introduced herself to Tsubaki before inviting her to go hunting with her and Rurihime. At the hunting ground, Rurihime sat under a tree, enjoying the scenery while Tsubaki and Akane struggled to defeat a boss-level monster. They tried to get her to help, but Rurihime chose to stay out of it and only healed when their HP ran low. Having no choice, the girls decided to mash their skill buttons like crazy, hoping that somehow they would unlock a hidden move that would help them. Unfortunately, that didn't work, so Tsubaki came up with another suggestion. But that also didn't work, and the monster left because they couldn't defeat it. However, they didn't feel discouraged and discussed the things they noticed during the fight that could help them the next time they faced the monster. Soon after, Akane logged out and left Tsubaki alone with Rurihime, who offered to help her fix her battered armor she called Yamada. She told him about how she went hunting with Tsubaki and Rurihime and asked for hints on how to defeat boss-level monsters. Their conversation lasted for hours, and when Akane realized how late it had gotten, she told Yamada she was glad she got to hear his voice and then hung up the phone. However, her hands couldn't stop shaking because she knew what saying those words to Yamada meant. Immediately, she called Momo and told her that there was something important she wanted to discuss with her. Momo insisted that they meet and discuss it face-to-face when Akane felt better, so a week later they met at a cafe. To Momo's disappointment, Akane asked if she could tell her why her ex dumped her since she couldn't understand why. Instead of responding, Momo called the waiter to take their orders, and after he left, Momo told her that she was disappointed. She explained that she'd been so excited to hear what Akane wanted to tell her, because she was sure it had something to do with Yamada. Instead, she brought up her useless ex again, which she admitted made her think Akane was still hung up on the loser. Akane assured her that she was over him, but said that if she wanted to move on, she had to know if she was the problem in her last relationship. The poor girl was so worried about this, but Momo assured her that she wasn't the problem. Just then, two guys whose existence should have been prevented by a rubber. And when they saw Momo, they approached their table completely ignoring the waitress, trying to get their attention. Momo recognized them as the annoying touchy-feely guys she went on a group date with a few days ago, so she asked Akane to ignore them. Akane put up her best Ice Queen impression, but the guys didn't take the hint and kept talking to both girls, making them uncomfortable. Fortunately, the waiter returned with Akane and Momo's order, and when Akane saw it was Hada, she was surprised. Hada calmly asked the guys who they were, and the guys claimed to be friends of Akane and Momo, but the waitress came and told him otherwise. This made him request that the guys take another table, but because he said this in a friendly way, the guys didn't listen. Having no choice, he took off his nice guy mask and repeated the question with a firmer tone, which left no room for argument. Intimidated by this, the guys switched tables immediately, and Hada returned to being his happy-go-lucky self. Momo asked Akane how she knew him, and she explained that he was one of her guildmates, causing Momo to wonder if all gamers looked like every girl's wet dream. Later, after the cave closed, Hada began heading home but was surprised to find Akane and Momo waiting for him. Of course, the delusional idiot asked if it was because they wanted to join his fan club, but Akane said it was because she had something important to discuss with him. The three of them then went to a nearby park, but Akane was so nervous that she kept quiet for 10 minutes until Momo blurted out that she was in love with someone. Akane was embarrassed that Momo revealed her secret just like that, but Hada thanked Momo for saving them time. He then told Akane that he knew who she was in love with, but she shyly asked him not to say who it was. Understanding how she felt, Hada kept quiet, but since Momo wanted to speed things up, she revealed that Akane was in the dumps because she wanted to know why her ex broke up with her. Since there was no longer any need for her to hide it, Akane explained things to Hada the same way she explained it to Momo earlier. Hada smiled and advised her to confess her feelings to Yamada, assuring her that if he rejected her, he and Momo would be available to cheer her up. Feeling encouraged, Akane left to find Yamada, so Momo thought it would be a great idea to try and riz Hada up. But it didn't work. Akane rushed over to Yamada's place, and by the time she arrived, she was panting like she'd run a marathon. When Yamada opened the door, he was surprised to see her and asked what she wanted from him. Akane tried to gather her thoughts and see how she'd tell him what she came to tell him, but before she could speak, two old people began greeting each other loudly in the street. Their voices, combined with that of the old woman's barking dog, made it hard for Akane to speak. Yamada then told her that he was about to leave for prep school and asked if she could wait for him to get ready. Akane agreed and stood by the door, but to her surprise, Yamada pulled her into the house by pulling the door shut. Unaware that his closeness to her made her heart race, he asked her to wait and then walked into his room. Akane was too stunned to move a muscle, but those muscles soon began working again when Yamada took off his shirt without warning. Immediately, she turned her back to him to avoid temptation, and in a matter of minutes, he was completely dressed and they left for the train station. As they walked together, Akane became lost in thought and began having second thoughts about confessing to him. She wondered if it would be best if she pushed her feelings aside and remained his friend even though it would hurt her. Her mind was so occupied with these thoughts that she nearly walked into oncoming traffic, but thankfully, Yamada pulled her back. He asked if she was feeling okay, but she didn't respond as she'd retreated into her mind. Seeing this, Yamada grabbed her hand and pulled her along with him when the traffic signal turned green. Soon they arrived at the train station, and he apologized for not having time to listen to what she had to say. Akane told him it was fine and said they could talk another time. So he turned to leave, however, the look she gave him made him stop. He told her that he'd call her after his classes ended so they could talk, and Akane said she'd wait for his call. After they parted ways, it started raining heavily, and the rain didn't stop falling by the time Yamada's classes ended. Okamoto asked Yamada how he was getting home, and Yamada said he had an umbrella, so Okamoto asked if they could share it. Yamada agreed, but when Okamoto learned that Tsubaki didn't have an umbrella, he offered his spot to her. Tsubaki tried to refuse it, but Okamoto pulled her aside and told her it was the perfect chance to confess her feelings, so she agreed to go with Yamada. As they walked, Yamada noticed Tsubaki was getting wet, so he gave her the umbrella and began running towards the station. Tsubaki tried to go after him, but she bumped into someone and fell, causing her glasses to fly off her face. Since she couldn't see without them, she got on her knees and tried looking for them. Thankfully, Yamada returned and helped her find it, but he told her that they were broken. Tsubaki didn't care, and as she stared at his blurry silhouette, she suddenly blurted out that she liked him. Realizing what she said, she let go of the umbrella and used both her hands to cover her mouth like that would erase what she said. Yamada didn't react to her sudden confession and just picked up the umbrella for her. Overwhelmed by everything, Tsubaki began crying and apologizing for putting him on the spot. She also begged him to at least, just for that night, think about her and what she said. Later, Yamada texted Akane, saying he couldn't talk that night because he was tired, and told her he'd talk to her some other time. The following day, while Yamada was tutoring Runa, Hada came to join them. As he sat on Runa's bed, he asked Yamada if someone had confessed to him, and Yamada asked how he knew. Thinking it was Akane, Hada told him it was a secret and asked if he'd responded to the confession. Yamada said he hadn't because he was still thinking things over. Surprised by this new development, Hada advised him to make up his mind quickly, because drawing it out was no different from toying with the girl's feelings and leading her on. That evening, Yamada showed up at Akane's workplace but didn't go inside, so when her co-worker told her he was sitting outside, she went to speak with him. He told her that she tried calling her, but her phone was switched off and she apologized, saying the battery had died. She then asked what was on his mind, as she noticed there was something different about him. Yamada said he was just tired from all the studying he'd been doing lately, but she didn't believe him. However, she didn't push the subject and began telling him about the new sword she got. Yamada asked what kind of sword it was and she told him to hold out his hand so she could draw it. When she finished, she told him that even though she didn't know what was bothering him, she wanted him to cheer up, adding that she preferred the mysterious Yamada to the brooding one. This made him admit that he usually kept his opinions to himself because he was afraid to say the wrong things. He also admitted he felt he was a worthless nobody, and the fact that he was bad at understanding jokes and people's feelings only made it worse. Akane told him that to her and all their friends, he was the most kind-hearted and caring person they knew, so he should never call himself a nobody. That night, Tsubaki met Yamada, and she already knew what he was going to say before he said, however, she was okay with it. He told her that he couldn't accept her feelings, and Tsubaki said she hadn't expected him to. She admitted that she'd liked him for a long time, but hid her feelings because she didn't want them to stop being friends. Feeling a bit bolder, she told him all the things she liked about him, and Yamada just stood there listening to her. When she finished, she started crying but said she didn't regret the way she felt about him. Yamada was moved by her honesty, and when his eyes began to sting, he tried to wipe them clean. This action drew Tsubaki's attention to the drawing Akane had drawn on his hand, and when she asked who drew it, he said it was a friend. Tsubaki then told him that she knew who the friend was because she was the one he liked. Yamada was silent for a while, but he agreed that she was correct that he liked Akane more than a friend. His admission made Tsubaki cry again, but she told him that she was glad he listened to her and turned her down nicely. When she was done crying, she told Yamada she was leaving, but because she didn't have her glasses on, she walked straight into the vending machine behind her. Yamada asked if she allowed him to walk her home, but Tsubaki stubbornly refused as she'd already embarrassed herself enough. Days later, Akane and the guild members, except Yamada and Tsubaki, met outside a new restaurant, and when they went inside, they were surprised to see that most of the patrons there knew Komoda. After they were directed to their private dining area, they began eating, and Akane declared that it was the best meat she'd ever tasted. Heda agreed with her and expressed his sadness that Tsubaki wouldn't join them to enjoy the meal. Runa said she was happy Tsubaki didn't come as she still viewed her as her enemy and wasn't afraid to say it. Just then, 4 restaurant staff members walked in with wine and more food, saying that Komoda's friends had asked them to deliver it. Komoda asked them to enjoy the food, but he and Akane were the only ones who could drink the wine. A little while later, Yamada arrived and Runa began telling him how delicious the food in the restaurant was. Suddenly, she stopped talking and with a look of fear in her eyes, she said Akane had returned. Before Yamada could ask why she looked so afraid, a drunk Akane latched onto him and began talking nonsense. Yamada asked how she'd gotten drunk, and Runa explained that she drank the entire bottle of wine. She begged Yamada to take Akane's drunk ass away as she had been overly affectionate towards her and she was tired of it. Yamada apologized for not sitting down to eat with them and then half-carried Akane away. Outside the train station, he pressed a bottle of water against Akane's cheek after she dozed off, and that cleared her head a bit. She apologized for inconveniencing him and said he could go because she was sober enough to go home alone. Yamada refused, saying there were too many drunkards around, and he didn't trust that they would leave her alone. He then held out his hand for her to take, and when she did, he began leading her through the street. Her heels suddenly got stuck between the cracks. So, like the perfect gentleman that he was, Akane helped her remove it and put the shoe back on her foot. He then stood up and took her hand in his again until they arrived at her place. Akane took out her keys and thanked him for walking her home, so Yamada took it as his cue to leave. However, before he could go far, Akane called out to him and suddenly asked if he liked her. Yamada smiled and said he didn't think he'd be busted so soon, which surprised her, but she didn't want to misinterpret his words. Before she could ask what he meant by his statement, Yamada looked her in the eyes and told her that he liked her. He also told her that he'd tell her again the next day when she wasn't drunk so she'd never forget it. When he turned to leave again, she asked if she could call him when she woke up in the morning, so she could be sure what happened wasn't a dream. Yamada told her that she could, and this time, instead of leaving, he pulled her to him and hugged her. The following day, Akane called Yamada, as promised, and he reassured her that what happened the previous night wasn't a dream. When she went to school later, she told Momo about it, and her friend was very excited to hear that she was finally in a relationship with Yamada. During lunch, they sat with a friend of theirs, who commended Akane for dating someone younger than her. This made Akane feel uneasy, so when she met Yamada later, she tried to act cool and said she would do her best not to be a burden to him. Not surprisingly, Yamada hadn't paid attention to what she was telling him because he'd been staring at her teeth. When he told her this, she became embarrassed, but he told her not to be as she had Mike's teeth. After they left the cafe, Yamada offered to walk her home, and as they walked, she kept staring at him. This made him ask what was on her mind, and she admitted that she wanted him to hold her hand. So he did and told her that she shouldn't hesitate to tell him the things she wanted from him. That's it for today's video. Don't forget to check out our channel to see if your favorite anime has been recapped.